Now let's talk about a new study, a study on gold smuggling from Africa. It was released earlier today. It says that in 2022, at least 435 tons of gold were smuggled out of Africa. 435 tons. That's more than 1 ton of gold every day. Do you know how much 435 tons of gold are worth? About $31 billion at today's rates.
Expelled foreign mining giants, country took full control of its gold industry. The result? In just one fiscal cycle, Burkina Faso generated over $18 billion from its own gold, money that used to vanish into foreign bank accounts. Now, that gold wealth is being reinvested into roads, schools, hospitals, housing, and national defense. Traoré didn't just kick out exploitation, he unlocked sovereignty. This is what it looks like when a nation says, our land, our rules, our
is not here to play by the old rules. He has again made a bold, historical move, one that places him firmly in the ranks of Africa's revolutionary leaders. And let it be known, Boko is not alone. He is walking the same path as his close friend and fellow visionary, Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. A path that doesn't ask for permission, a path that doesn't beg, a path that reclaims what rightfully belongs to the people.
Gold helped turn Ghana's fortunes around. In 2022, the West African country's economy had lost its shine, and it had to seek help from the International Monetary Fund. Things look very different now, with revenue from small-scale gold mining bringing in more than $8 billion. That's partly.
For generations, Africa's soil has fueled the wealth of distant nations while leaving the continent itself trapped in poverty. Beneath the ground lies extraordinary abundance: gold, diamonds, copper, cobalt, lithium, uranium, bauxite, manganese, and rare earth minerals essential to modern industry. Yet above ground, millions of Africans continue to live without reliable electricity, clean water, or industrial jobs. This contradiction has defined Africa's relationship with Western mining companies for more than a century. That relationship is now being dismantled. Across the continent, governments are canceling licenses, rewriting mining codes, banning the export of raw minerals, demanding local processing, and forcing foreign companies to renegotiate contracts or leave entirely. What was once unthinkable is happening in real time. Western miners who operated for decades under favorable terms are being pushed out, and the reaction from Europe and North America has been fierce. The anger is not just economic, it is geopolitical. Africa is no longer playing the role assigned to it. For most of modern history, the mining sector in Africa operated under an extractive model designed elsewhere. Colonial-era concessions evolved into post-independence contracts that changed little in substance. Western corporations controlled exploration, extraction, pricing, shipping, and refining. African countries supplied the raw material, bore the environmental damage, and received only a fraction of the final value. This system was defended as necessary for development. Investment, technology, and expertise were said to justify the imbalance. But decades later, the results speak for themselves. Mining regions remain among the poorest areas on the continent. Infrastructure around extraction zones is minimal. Local industries failed to emerge. Wealth flowed outward, not inward. The frustration built slowly, then suddenly. As global demand for minerals surged, particularly those needed for renewable energy, electric vehicles, and digital infrastructure, Africa began to see the true value of what it had been giving away. Prices skyrocketed, corporate profits soared, yet local communities saw little improvement. The realization was unavoidable. Africa was subsidizing the world's industrial future with its poverty. This realization coincided with a shift in political consciousness. A new generation of leaders, economists, and citizens began questioning contracts that had never been transparent. Civil society groups exposed royalty rates that were shockingly low. Environmental reports documented poisoned rivers and ruined farmland. Public pressure grew. Governments could no longer ignore it. The result has been a wave of policy changes that Western mining firms describe as hostile but African governments describe as long overdue. New mining laws now require higher royalties, local ownership, and mandatory processing inside national borders. Export bans on unrefined minerals are spreading. State mining companies are being revived. In some cases, governments have outright revoked licenses from companies that refuse to comply with new terms. Western firms have responded with outrage. They warn of capital flight, legal action, and economic instability. They accuse African governments of violating contracts and undermining investor confidence. But for many Africans, this outrage only confirms how deeply unbalanced the old system was. When companies threaten to leave because they are asked to share more value, the injustice becomes undeniable. The fury from the West also exposes a deeper fear: losing control over strategic supply chains. Modern economies depend on minerals that Africa produces in abundance. Electric vehicle batteries rely on African lithium and cobalt. Renewable energy systems require copper, manganese, and rare earths. Military technology, aerospace, and digital infrastructure all depend on materials extracted from African soil. When Africa restricts exports or demands local processing, it disrupts entire global industries. This is why the reaction has been so intense. For decades, Western power was reinforced by control of resources. Access was guaranteed, prices were stable, and profits were predictable. That certainty is now disappearing. African countries are using their leverage to reshape global markets, and the West is unprepared for a world where Africa sets the terms. What makes this moment different from past resource nationalism is that Africa now has alternatives. In earlier eras, Western firms dominated because they were the only source of capital, technology, and expertise. Today, that monopoly is gone. New partners are willing to invest in refineries, smelters, and industrial parks. Regional development banks are financing processing facilities. Domestic companies are emerging. Africa is no longer isolated. This shift has given governments confidence. They know that if one partner refuses to adapt, another will step in. Competition has replaced dependency. The strategy is deliberate. African leaders are not simply kicking out miners for political reasons. They are restructuring entire value chains. Minerals must now be processed locally. Jobs must be created domestically. Technology must be transferred. Revenue must fund development. Mining is no longer tolerated as an isolated activity that benefits only shareholders abroad. This has begun to transform local economies. Industrial zones are rising near mining regions. Processing plants are being built where raw materials once left unrefined. Skills training programs are expanding. Governments are linking mining licenses to infrastructure projects, power generation, and transport networks. The change is slow and complex, but the direction is irreversible. Western companies argue that these demands raise costs and reduce competitiveness. African governments respond that the old model was profitable precisely because it externalized costs onto African communities and environments. The new model insists that mining must benefit the host nation first. The environmental dimension has also played a major role in the backlash against Western miners. Decades of lax regulation left polluted rivers, toxic tailings, and destroyed farmland. Communities living near mines experienced health crises while companies paid minimal cleanup costs. Governments are now enforcing stricter environmental rules, forcing firms to invest in remediation or leave. Many are choosing to leave. This has intensified Western criticism, but it has strengthened domestic support for reform. For citizens, mining is no longer an abstract economic activity. It is a question of dignity, health, and national sovereignty. Another factor driving the shift is Africa's growing regional coordination. Countries are aligning mining policies to prevent companies from exploiting weaker regulations across borders. Regional blocs are discussing shared strategies for mineral processing, value addition, and price stabilization. This cooperation strengthens bargaining power and reduces vulnerability to pressure from any single company or country. The West's anger also stems from the loss of narrative control. For years, Western governments and corporations framed themselves as indispensable partners in African development. That narrative is collapsing. African nations are proving that they can negotiate, invest, and build without surrendering sovereignty. This challenges deeply held assumptions about who leads and who follows in global economics. The backlash has taken many forms. Diplomatic pressure has increased. Media coverage emphasizes risk and instability. Investment ratings are downgraded. Legal threats are issued, but none of these tactics have reversed the trend. If anything, they have hardened public support for reform, reinforcing the belief that Africa must control its destiny. The decision to push out Western miners is also part of a broader shift toward economic sovereignty. Mining is only the beginning. Similar reforms are underway in energy, agriculture, ports, and telecommunications. African governments are asserting control over strategic sectors, ensuring that national interests come before foreign profits. This transformation is redefining Africa's place in the global economy. Instead of exporting raw materials and importing finished goods, the continent is beginning to move up the value chain. Instead of dependency, it is pursuing partnership. Instead of silence, it is negotiating loudly. The transition is not without risk. Building processing capacity requires capital, expertise, and strong governance. Corruption and mismanagement remain challenges. Global market volatility can disrupt plans. But African leaders increasingly see these risks as manageable compared to the certainty of continued exploitation under the old system. The West's fury reflects more than lost revenue. It reflects a loss of control. The assumption that Africa would always supply cheap minerals without asking questions is gone. The continent has learned its value, and it is no longer willing to sell it cheaply. This moment marks a psychological shift as much as an economic one. Africans are rejecting the idea that development must come from outside. They are redefining success on their own terms. Mining is being transformed from an extractive curse into a potential engine of industrialization. The world is witnessing the end of a century-old model built on imbalance. Africa is no longer a quarry for global powers. It is a stakeholder, a negotiator, and increasingly, a decision-maker. As this transformation continues, global supply chains will adapt, prices may rise, industries may relocate, power will shift. But one thing is certain: Africa will never again be silent about the value of its wealth. The fury from the West is the sound of an old system collapsing. What replaces it will not be perfect, but it will be fairer. And for the first time in generations, Africa will decide how its resources shape its future. As Africa continues to reclaim control of its mining sector, the effects are spreading far beyond the continent's borders. The global economy, long accustomed to cheap and reliable access to African minerals, is being forced to adjust. Supply chains are tightening, prices are rising, and governments in the West are scrambling to secure alternative sources. What was once taken for granted is now uncertain, and that uncertainty is reshaping the global balance of power. The immediate consequences are already visible. Industries in Europe and North America that rely on steady mineral imports are facing delays, increased costs, and strategic vulnerability. Manufacturers of electric vehicles, renewable energy systems, electronics, and military technology are discovering that their dependence on African resources is deeper than they realized. When African countries insist on processing minerals locally or restrict exports entirely, the shock ripples through factories thousands of miles away. This disruption has forced a painful reckoning in Western capitals. For decades, resource security was maintained through influence, agreements, and corporate dominance. Those tools are now losing effectiveness. African governments, backed by popular support, are standing firm. They understand that the world needs their resources more than they need the old system, and they are using that leverage with increasing confidence. What makes this transformation historic is its permanence. Previous attempts at resource nationalism in Africa often collapsed under external pressure, internal instability, or lack of alternatives. This time, the conditions are different. The global economy is hungry for minerals. New partners exist. Regional cooperation is stronger. Public awareness is higher. Most importantly, African leaders have learned from the past and are determined not to repeat it. The continent's new mining strategy is built around a simple principle: value must stay where resources are taken. This principle is reshaping policy, investment, and diplomacy. Governments are demanding that minerals be refined locally. They are tying mining rights to infrastructure projects, energy development, and job creation. They are insisting on technology transfer and local participation. Mining is no longer tolerated as an isolated industry. It must serve national development. This shift is transforming how African economies are structured. Processing plants create skilled jobs. Smelters require stable electricity, encouraging investment in power generation. Transport corridors built for mining support agriculture and trade. Industrial clusters begin to form. Slowly, the economy diversifies and dependence on raw exports diminishes. For local communities, the changes are deeply meaningful. For the first time, people living near mines are seeing roads, schools, clinics, and employment opportunities that directly result from resource extraction. Environmental regulations, once ignored, are being enforced. While challenges remain, the sense of injustice that once surrounded mining is beginning to ease. The West's reaction to these changes reveals how deeply entrenched the old system was. Media narratives often frame Africa's actions as dangerous, irresponsible, or populist. Investors warn of instability. Diplomatic pressure intensifies. But beneath these reactions lies a refusal to accept a simple truth. Africa is exercising its sovereign right to manage its resources in its own interest. This resistance has only strengthened public support across the continent. Citizens see the outrage as proof that Africa's resources were undervalued for decades. They recognize that the anger is not about fairness, but about lost privilege. In many countries, resource reform has become a symbol of national pride and self-respect. At the same time, African governments are navigating this transition with growing sophistication. They are not rejecting investment. They are filtering it. Companies willing to adapt to new rules are welcomed. Those clinging to outdated contracts are not. This distinction is crucial. Africa is not anti-Western, anti-business, or anti-globalization. It is anti-exploitation. The shift also has implications for global geopolitics. As Africa controls more of its mineral wealth, it gains diplomatic leverage. Countries seeking secure supply chains must now negotiate on African terms. This elevates Africa's position in international forums and strengthens its ability to influence global rules on trade, environment, and development. The energy transition has made Africa's position even more strategic. The world's move away from fossil fuels depends on minerals Africa controls in large quantities. Without African cobalt, lithium, manganese, and copper, the green transition slows. This reality gives African nations a seat at the table in shaping the future of energy, technology, and climate policy. Western governments are now racing to respond. New initiatives are being proposed to secure minerals through partnerships rather than extraction. Yet these efforts face skepticism. African leaders have heard similar promises before. What they want now are enforceable commitments, shared value, and respect for sovereignty. The continent's stance is also inspiring similar movements elsewhere. Resource-rich regions around the world are watching closely. If Africa succeeds in transforming mining into development, it will set a precedent that could change global resource economics forever. This is one reason the West's reaction has been so intense. Africa's success threatens a model that has benefited powerful economies for over a century. Despite the progress, challenges remain. Building processing capacity requires time and capital. Governance systems must be strengthened to ensure revenues are used for development rather than lost to corruption. Environmental protection must remain a priority. Education and training are essential to build a skilled workforce capable of sustaining industrial growth. Yet Africa's leaders increasingly view these challenges as manageable obstacles rather than reasons for inaction. The greater risk, they argue, is continuing a system that guarantees underdevelopment. The psychological shift underway may be the most important change of all. Africans are rejecting the idea that poverty is inevitable. They are rejecting the notion that development must be imported. They are embracing the belief that the continent's wealth can and should serve its people first. Mining, once a symbol of exploitation, is being reimagined as a tool for nation building. This transformation will not happen overnight, but the direction is clear. The rules have changed, and Africa is righting them. As Western miners pack up operations or renegotiate under new terms, a message is being sent to the world: access to Africa's resources is no longer automatic. It must be earned through partnership, fairness, and shared growth. The days of extraction without development are ending. In the years ahead, global markets will adapt, prices will adjust, supply chains will be rebuilt, new partnerships will emerge. But Africa will no longer be the weakest link in the chain, it will be a gatekeeper. The fury from the West is the sound of a system losing its grip. What replaces it will not be perfect, but it will be more balanced. Africa's decision to kick out Western miners who refuse reform marks the beginning of a new era, one defined by sovereignty, dignity, and economic self-determination. This moment will be remembered as the point when Africa finally said enough. Enough of watching wealth leave while poverty stayed. Enough of contracts written elsewhere. Enough of being told what development should look like. Africa is no longer asking for a seat at the table. It is building its own, and that is why the West is furious.